My dad used to tell me when you were really nervous, you should say you're excited instead. So when you're in front of a crowd and you're feeling a little bit nervous, instead what you should say is, I'm excited. So I'm excited to be here with you this morning. I actually have been a member of Rotary in my past life and was with the University Club for many years, so I'm really excited to be here. Today what I'm going to talk about is actually one part of what Dr. Rambo was talking about earlier, and it's really imagination and how that relates to innovation. So the piece that I'm going to be talking about is how human stories help organizations see problems, identify unmet needs, and look for opportunities for growth. And if you think about being a Rotarian and the whole mantra of service above self, you're actually looking for those opportunities in your communities every day. We look around and we see people who may be challenged because of a life situation. There's a problem because a school needs something new. We're always seeking opportunities to put others above ourselves. And it's a great platform for actually finding human stories that matter to each of us. Plato said, "Those who tell stories rule the world." And today, what I'm hoping to share with you are 10 ideas for how to find those stories and bring them into your organization to help motivate innovation and change. I really fundamentally believe that human stories are the source of possibility, and stories help us relate to others and find new ways of doing things. Another way of saying this is that stories or seeing and then telling stories, the innovator is the person who sees what everyone else has seen but imagines something different. Or you see what everyone else is observing and you see an opportunity instead of a challenge. And I know that can be really hard, so I actually was thrilled that there's a baby here this morning, because one of the things that's really important for us is thinking about how we imagine things or how we see things when we're brand new. And it's hard for us, with a lot of experience, to imagine things as brand new. So today I'm just going to talk through 10 ideas that I hope will be helpful to you as you think about how to bring seeing into your organizations. The first is really start with why. Why does something have to work a certain way? Getting very curious about how things work is often the start of things, and that can come from a lot of different places. Here's an example, right? Why is the bread not sliced? If I could just do that thing better, it would have a big impact and I could make more money. Many of you may have experienced this. Dr. Rambo very recently. Why does a TSA line work like this, right? And we've all been in that situation where we look at it, and if you're looking at it from above, you often think there has to be a better way to do this, right? And that's an innovation opportunity. What are the set of things that we could bring together to make that look different? Or another example, this is an experience that many of us have had in our doctor's office. We walk into a doctor's office, and even though we've been there 40 times, we still fill out the same paperwork. And we often start with our name, which actually I always joke, they already know, right? And it's on the label above, but they still hand you a blank piece of paper. Why does it work that way? And I think we get so accustomed to the way things work that we stop asking that question, because we have experience and we walk through the world that way. So we stop wondering why. And so one of the things that I think is really important is asking ourselves, is this us? Are we the frog hanging out in a pot and we're not noticing that anything's getting warmer? The second is really to the baby, right? Assume a beginner's mind. And when we see a child like this, we're often inspired to think about the things that we take for granted. and we think about the future in a new and different way. And I think that one of the things that's really powerful is actually walking through something for the first time with someone who's very different from you. This is where service comes in. Sometimes when you, for example, go with someone who's new to the country and you go to the grocery store and you go into a cereal aisle, they say, "This entire thing is cereal? I can't believe it. It's amazing," right? But for us, we're just autopiloting. It's like, I need my Cheerios, I need the frosted fruit flakes, and I'm out. And so a piece of an opportunity is really finding someone who lives a different life than you do and in a different context so that you can actually have that beginner's mindset. And it's hard to do for ourselves. So that's one of the other ways that really being in relationship with others in our community can help us, because it helps us have that opportunity for context and a beginner's mindset. The third is the idea of getting immersed. And one of the things that I always say is that it's about them, not you, and it's our job to start, not end the story. So what does this mean? If you're feeding a baby for the first time, it's all about the baby, right? You may think it's not about you, but the baby who doesn't want to eat and who's throwing food everywhere and getting food on really everything, if you've lived this recently, it's that the baby is what? What is that baby feeling at that moment? What's the story the baby's telling?
You don't know what it is.
Right, it feels different. What's this stuff? What's this? Is this a spoon or a fork? Why do I have this? I mean, my hands are awesome. I don't need any of that other stuff, right? And then what's mom feeling and thinking at that moment? I'll do it for you because we have 10 minutes and we're going to be late again, right? And if you could not get your yogurt all over me, that would be super, because I have a meeting this morning, right? And dad's thinking, here we go again. Everyone's going to be stressed before we walk out the door. But and the reason that I can tell you that story and it's relatable to you is because you've had the experience of the story, right? Some people more frequently than others, but it's really hard to have that experience without actually being in the story or having lived some part of the story. And so part of the challenge for us is actually experiencing the story as someone else is living it, not watching it from above, but actually being in it. So the idea is, how can you get closer to things that will actually allow you to do that? How can you actually get embedded in the story and ideally make yourself a part of the story? So one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do, for example, is go with a utility during an outage and actually see what happens out in the field. And you have people who are up in very high bucket trucks. They're trying to connect technology to actually see what's working and what isn't. That's physically separated from them by 50 feet. And it's windy, because this always happens in the middle of a storm. It changes the way you think about how you would solve those problems, because you've lived the experience with someone in a part of their life that's very stressful. So hopefully this is more joyful than stressful, which is also a fun part of experience. The next idea is really, it's a story, not an abstraction. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to go, whoopsie. An abstraction is something that actually takes away the human context. And how many times do we get research that looks like this? Excuse me. Of 100 babies between the ages of 8 and 11 months, 78% want to be able to feed themselves, right? We've all gotten tons of research that looks like that. A story feels very different. Babies who are learning to eat get frustrated because their coordination doesn't allow them to hit their mouth, ever, right? Mom and dad are frustrated with the time it takes and the mess involved. For families on the go, this is a bigger problem because it takes 48 minutes to feed a child when we only have 8 available. So the point that I'm trying to make is not that data isn't important, but that when you add the story in, you actually can get people to a different level of insight because they're actually feeling it with you. And if you think about any great story, think about the last most fantastic movie you saw. You felt a lot of different emotions through the course of the movie, and that stuck with you in a different way. So part of what I'm saying is take that into the stories that you tell in a business context so that you can actually help people go along with you on the ride. Just to build on that idea, a great story has characters, plot, an incident, and a description. And when you're working on innovation, oftentimes your product or service is the hero in this story, right? And so if you think about the story that we were just talking about with the baby, we had the characters, the baby's the protagonist, the mom might be the antagonist. What's the plot? Someone has to get somewhere very quickly. It's not happening yet, right? There's a power struggle. The incident is the bull flying across the room, hitting the wall on the other side. And a description, right? So we might need other things around that help us make sense of it. In this case, that becomes a frame for how you actually do or think about innovation, because now we can ask ourselves, what ideas do we have? What's the innovation we could try? What do we imagine that could look different than this, right? All of those things come into play, but it's a lot easier when we have a story that frames that for us, right? As opposed to 78% of babies between the ages of 8 and 11 months are frustrated with feeding. Which one motivates us to action? And the story. And the reason this is important is in corporations or in organizations, we oftentimes can't do things alone. And so what we have to do is motivate others to be a part of our solution or to do things in a different way. So the change that Dr. Rambo was just talking about is really important. How do we help people through the change? One of the ways you can help people is by actually telling the stories that help them understand why they're making the change. Because telling people it's important that we optimize around XYZ is fine, and it's an important piece of the information. But if we can help people understand the why and relate to the story of the people we're actually trying to affect, we have a lot greater chance of engaging them and having them come along with our solution. So it's a strategy not just for innovation, but it's a strategy for change that helps people see themselves as part of the solution. If anyone has seen Big Hero 6, you probably know a little bit about the story. The story in this case, maybe I should ask, how many people have seen Big Hero 6? A few. So I'm going to tell a little bit about the story. So in this story, there is a boy whose older brother has invented this robot. The robot is actually, he's a soft robot because he's a health robot. And what he wants to be able to do is hug people, and then by doing that, feel how they're feeling and help them with their health. And there are lots of twists and turns in the stories. And if you actually, it's a great story about innovation. So if you ever do have a chance to watch it with a child especially, it's a very fun process because they kind of can't sit through it, and they start actually playing with things and making things that they imagine based on what they're doing in the movie. But imagine that you tell the story and Baymax blows up like a balloon and then squishes down and then blows up. And that's sort of part of the storyline. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about this is it's a really hard story. The story starts because a child older brother died, and that's the robot that's left behind. So I think that's one of the really important things to take from that. That emotion gets woven in and is a core part of what allows us to tell the story. Motivate people to stay engaged with you. Telling the stories inside organizations help people continue on and actually be a part of the solution. And you get to decide whether it's a fairy tale or a nightmare ending, right? And oftentimes it happens because you're able to enlist other people's help. And so the stories help us keep connected to why we're doing these things. I think this is a really classic, iconic kind of picture because it asks us, how does this story end? And everybody wants to know. And in an organization, that's really what we're trying to set up with a story. How does this story end? Is it heroic or is it a disaster? Try to create a solution for the insight that you created. So once you have an insight from the story, you want to try to actually come up with ideas or innovations that help solve. One of the things that we often do is we make this part really expensive and hard. And I think that you can actually do things in a really simple way. So here they're trying to show a piece of software. It happens to be a chair like this with a piece of paper drawn in front. And they are allowing people to actually play with it. I think that one of the things that we can do is actually, this is a way to engage people in our stories so that they're actually a part of helping solve. This is a new solution for a phone that goes in a system, that it goes in a purse that is actually also wired. So again, very low fidelity. My child could do this. My child's 8. And so we can make it easy for other people to get in the story with us. And then if we think about that baby and the solutions earlier, we had a bunch of failures before we got to success. The lower fidelity, the prototype, the lower the stakes to just saying, let's try another one, right? Let's try something else. Let's do it again. And that's one of the things that's really important, so you can actually be in it together with people. Just to reiterate that point, viewing failure as an opportunity to learn, we often view failure as failure. And one of the things that's really important is to see failure as, we tried something, and what was the insight that we got from that? So we say fail to learn versus fail to fail. And then Febreze is an example of this. Febreze was actually launched by Procter & Gamble, and one of the things that's really interesting is they launched it as a smell reducer, and it was neutral. So it didn't smell like anything at the end. And after actually spending time with moms at home who clean their house, they realized that one of the insights was that people want to actually feel a sense of accomplishment, and when something doesn't smell, you don't feel like you accomplished anything, right? And so what they did is they actually added smell in, so it's a reward instead of nothing. And this is actually a multi-million-dollar platform product today, but I think it's an example of how, when you use the stories about what people want and need, you have an opportunity for innovation. Keep learning, build organizational empathy. One of the things here that I would just mention is Brian Cornell, who's the CEO of Chicago, of Target, has been visiting store shoppers in Chicago where he can be anonymous. Why is that? Because he wants to hear their stories. Not mediated, not abstracted, right? But he wants to hear the story directly from the people who are doing it. And by doing that, he's setting a great leadership example of building organizational empathy. Because if your CEO is doing something, guess what? Other people should do it as well. And then finally, share. Share your stories. I mean, I think that there's nothing in the world that moves people more than hearing stories about other people. And so this is an example of how some organizations do that by literally letting people be listening to what's happening in a call center. They're not actually answering the calls, but they're just walking by and able to really plug in and listen. And finally, I just really wanted to bring up the Rotary polio example because I think that insights with action can change the world. My timing is almost perfect. And I think that the stories that people tell each other are the things that motivate us to keep going, even when things take a long time. We've been fighting polio for a long time, but it's a huge opportunity to actually change the lives of children and people around the world. Thank you.